Hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode of the greatest UFO mystery, the Phoenix Lights. The greatest mystery? It's Roswell. Well, Roswell's not really a mystery, is it? Because then the CIA was like, yeah, it's a weather balloon. And then they were like, all right, it's planes. It's secret spy planes. Okay, you know what? It's not aliens. It's never aliens. Well, maybe this is the greatest mystery because, frankly, I've never heard of it. Hilarious, right? Let's just jump in. Oh my God, we may have hit the mother lode with this one. What are the odds of being convinced about UFOs by the end of this video? About 0.4%, I'd say. But as always, like Fox Mulder, I want to believe. I do believe in aliens. I absolutely believe there are aliens out there. Probably a lot of them. Do I believe that they have come to Earth, intervened in our affairs, or have any interest in us whatsoever? No, not at all. To them, we're like ants or amoebas, utterly insignificant. I think we can agree that there must be other forms of intelligent life out there in the vast expanse of space. But these beings aren't regularly popping down to Earth to, for example, build the pyramids, kidnap some yokels for anal probing, or scoop up boats in the Bermuda Triangle. It's ludicrous. These super-intelligent aliens, capable of faster-than-light travel, coming here just to look at our bottoms? Ridiculous. It's like people who claim to have had things mysteriously up their butts and then blame it on aliens. They're absurd. People have been spotting UFOs for millennia, but let's remember UFO does not mean alien spacecraft. It simply means unidentified flying object, which could be anything. A plane, a balloon, a weird cloud formation, Venus, or even just light reflections. Most UFO sightings can be explained by earthly phenomena, and those that can't often lack photographic or video evidence. So let's jump into the event commonly referred to as the Phoenix Lights. Not only is there photographic and video evidence, but this event was also witnessed by hundreds, if not thousands, of people. I've heard of this, and it is quite compelling, but by the end of it, I remember not being convinced. Is there an earthly explanation for what these people saw? Well, let's find out. Cast your minds back to March 1997. Do you remember what you were up to? I was about 10 years old, probably in school, bored, doing maths or something. Imagine being 16 and freshly released from dental and optical social hell, having just gotten your braces off and swapped dorky NHS glasses for contact lenses, entering your heartbreaker phase perhaps. Now imagine looking up into the night sky and seeing a formation of lights unlike anything you've ever seen before. These weren't just any lights. No, they formed a massive V-shaped pattern, silently gliding across the sky. Witnesses described it as otherworldly, an experience that left an indelible mark on their memories. Could it be that hundreds of people shared a collective hallucination, an indelicacy? You understand? Then is marked necessary beautiful struttles that delineated something different. They could only be the work of undead experimental tests. Was it some top-secret military exercise? Possibly. Or was it something far more extraordinary? Evidence of intelligent life beyond our planet. The Phoenix Lights incident remains one of the most well-documented and perplexing UFO sightings in modern history. Despite numerous investigations and countless theories, the true nature of the phenomenon has never been definitively explained. For some, it is a tantalizing glimpse into the unknown. For others, it is a reminder that not all mysteries have solutions. Regardless of where you stand on the issue, the Phoenix Lights continue to captivate the imaginations of UFO enthusiasts and skeptics alike. As we delve deeper into this enigma, we'll explore the testimonies of eyewitnesses, scrutinize the available evidence, and consider the various explanations that have been proposed over the years. Prepare yourself for a journey into the unknown, where the line between fact and fiction becomes increasingly blurred. Could this be the key to unlocking one of the greatest mysteries of our time? Let's find out. More and more calls started coming into 911 operators later in the evening, continuing up until around 10 p.m. Hundreds of people saw several orbs in the sky, now generally described as bright or brilliant lights in a row. These lights were higher up than they had been reported over Nevada and northern Arizona earlier in the evening. They appeared one by one and were visible for over 20 minutes, holding position and altitude before eventually disappearing in a different order. While there was little local press coverage and not much air time given to the phenomenon, many people were unsure about what they had seen. Phoenix councilwoman Frances Barwood eventually brought it up in city council meetings, ostensibly as a public safety issue. To her surprise, nobody seemed remotely interested in discussing the strange lights. According to Barwood, in the 2005 documentary The Phoenix Lights, she was approached by a city manager after the meeting who said, "You shouldn't have asked that question." Oh my, but is there any record of that? Or is this just a one-woman's story? What does a mayor do anyway? Products. Instance, campaigns maker. Mayor Babe even do anything? Is there any manager do anything? Or do they just show up, see a groundhog and tell people where the wind is coming from? What does a mayor do anyway? Barwood was determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, especially since she had the backing of hundreds of Phoenix residents who were still calling to confirm what they had seen and asking questions. As might be expected, however, Barwood quickly became a laughingstock both in the council offices and in the press. A cartoon was printed with a light switch on her forehead, captioned, "Those mysterious lights over Phoenix. They're on, but nobody's home." Barwood was also shown wearing an "I UFOs" badge and a sign saying, "Frances M. Barwood, stop the cover-up." She was subjected to workplace bullying, with colleagues handing out business cards with their names on them and "Speak to the tinfoil, I will hear you" printed on them. People are a bit harsh, aren't they? If so many people had seen these lights and believed in them, they wouldn't be mocking her. They'd be saying, "Oh, she's really into getting to the truth." But the rest of us are just like, can we get on with our jobs, please? The aliens, if they came, are gone. Haven't these people got anything better to do? Yes, it does seem a bit harsh from her colleagues. Chill out, guys. All she's doing is looking out for the public's interest. She even wrote a letter to then-Senator John McCain asking for an investigation to be carried out. He passed the request on to the National Archives, but did not state that it was a councilwoman who was asking, only that it was a concern from a constituent. Anything sent to the National Archives is just filed away, not investigated, so nothing happened. Sounds like John McCain did exactly what you expect, sent it to the National Archives where it would be archived away in a hole, never to be looked at again. The Air Force had no interest in launching an investigation either. Eventually, in June, the governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, held a press conference saying they would get to the bottom of the mysterious lights. Later that same day, he called another press conference to close down the story. Oh, that is suspicious, isn't it? Governor Symington says, we're definitely going to look into this then later. It feels like he got shut down by the government. If this were aliens, the government would look into it. But if it's something the CIA or the Air Force were up to, some secret government project, then they're likely to call the governor and say, "Listen, Fife, we're not going to threaten you, but you need to do us a favor because we're the CIA. We can destroy your family. Don't make us destroy you." Sillington then brought out someone dressed in a space alien suit to confirm this was a joke and not a real alien. They revealed a disheveled and probably quite sweaty human inside. You're the governor of a state. What are you doing? You're not a mayor. Governor Fife Symington once said, "This just goes to show that you guys are entirely too serious." The audience laughed, and that was basically the end of it. This made Councilwoman Barwood quite upset. It seemed like they were not only making fun of her, but also mocking the estimated 100,000 people who saw the strange lights and had been contacting her since she started asking questions. While the story became global news, it always just ended with a bit of a shrug. On anniversaries of the event, the same old witnesses regularly pop up again. But even though this is the longest-lasting UFO event on record, seen by the most people, it's been quietly put to the side. Are all these people kooks? Did they see something explainable but top secret? Why wasn't anyone in the media investigating? The answer might be quite disappointing. It's probably the military doing some military stuff. Arizona is a well-known hotbed of extraterrestrial activity. Just look at the Travis Walton abduction story. However, the state ranks only about number 7 in the list of US states for UFO sightings. California is first by far, followed perhaps unsurprisingly by Florida. As for where Arizona is on the map, I'm not entirely sure. It could be next to Florida, Washington State, California, or near Vegas. The US map gets a bit confusing, especially in the Northeast where states are tiny and numerous. But there are people out there, like those who play GeoGuessr, who can pinpoint locations with incredible accuracy and speed. Moving on, large population centers like California and Florida mean more people to log reports. Both states also have Space Force bases, a relatively new thing. This means that many unidentifiable objects in the sky might just be rockets, satellites, space debris, other stuff connected to launching things into the air. Arizona and Nevada don't have Space Force bases, so we might rule that out. The lights were reportedly very close to the ground. Some witnesses said about 100 feet. A judging distance can be challenging, but it's definitely not satellites, as they're much higher up. What Arizona does have, in close proximity to where the lights were seen, is an airport, the Phoenix Sky Harbor International Airport, and the Luke Air Force Base used as a pilot training ranges. That us. So let's start our search for answers about the Phoenix lights. The March 1997 sightings weren't even the first time lights like this had been seen in the area. 2 years prior, in 1995, Dr. Lynn Kaite took photos of glowing amber lights in front of South Mountain in Arizona. Just 2 months before the main event, she saw a line of 3 lights and a line of 6 more above them. Basic point-and-click cameras went up to March in the mid-90s, so the photo she caught bore a slightly fuzzy resemblance to the lights that later appeared in March. Intrigued, she placed a call to the local base to see if they were interested in the story. or if they knew of anything happening that could explain the lights she'd seen. They probably groaned internally, thinking, "Oh, Dr. Kaiti again." Right? It's like when people email me repeatedly about covering their amazing conspiracy stories. They get frustrated when I don't respond, but I'm not obligated to cover every wild tale that lands in my inbox. They said no one had called about anything like that, even though she had the previous night. They were probably ignoring the call, thinking, "We're talking to you now, you know you made that call, it's not some suspicious cover-up." They suggested calling Luke Air Force Base, a sensible idea. Kaite says the base denied doing anything the night before, practically before she'd even finished asking. Well, they're the military. You call and ask, "Were you up to anything last night?" And they respond, "No, they're not going to admit to anything." Instead, they pointed her to Sky Harbor Airport, another sensible suggestion. She called there and eventually got through to someone in air traffic control who confirmed that people were working the previous night and had seen some strange lights in the sky. But these lights had not appeared on their radars. When Kite excitedly asked about the lights, the man just said, "Beats me," and that was the end of it. They probably see weird stuff all the time and think it's just normal phenomena. Were the lights really like everyone says they were? We are talking about two different things here. The V-shaped craft with lights that flew over witnesses, and the line of orb lights over Phoenix. Unfortunately, maybe conveniently, no photos or videos were taken of the boomerang or V-shaped craft, although all witnesses described it in almost exactly the same way. When Kite took her first video of a line of lights in front of the mountain, she described them as large, but you don't really get a sense of that in the footage. She explained this by saying, "The video doesn't do it justice. In real life, they're huge, they're amber, there's no flaring, they're like a ball. On the video, they flicker, they're white, they're much smaller, but nonetheless the formations themselves are compelling. It's true that sometimes when you film things, they don't always look the same as they do in real life. The moon, for example, always looks massive, but in photos it looks small due to an optical illusion, comparing it to the horizon line. Going back to the slow-flying craft, some witnesses reported seeing the underside of it as it went over them and that it had an iridescent undulating look. Surely something that size and shape with no visible means of propulsion must be from another world, right? Well, let's take a quick reality check. Secret military tech. You can never truly rule out top secret operations, of course. There's no way to prove this, but you can bet your backside that the US military is testing out all kinds of tech at any given time without letting the public know what's happening. That's why they have the black budget where billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars go, and no one knows what they're doing with it. They're making cool stuff all the time, which leads to stealth aircraft and all that cutting-edge military tech. Jesus, that drilling is driving me insane. I know you guys can't hear it somehow through the miracle of technology, but I'm trying to read this and it's just constantly like drilling noise. And you're like, oh, that's not distracting at all. It interrupts my thoughts all the time. I've got a headache the size of Nebraska. Let's move on before I lose my mind completely. We know the V-shaped craft couldn't possibly have been a plane or helicopter, but what about something like an airship? Well, that makes sense, and it would be very quiet as well, wouldn't it? A really massive helium-filled airship, shaped like an arrowhead or wedge, would glide nicely through the air with minimal sound. Who knows how big we could build one? probably not a mile wide. That's impractical, but something big enough to really impress onlookers below. As we don't know exactly how high the thing was flying, it's hard to gauge the size of it accurately, and there are no known photos or videos of the flying craft. But why not? Tens of thousands of people said they saw this in 1997. There were definitely video cameras, even if not everyone had them on their phones. I've got holiday videos from before 1997. Why would it be flying so low, though? Maybe it was being tested and wasn't responding to controls properly. Maybe it was the shadow of the airship that people saw, although it was in the evening, so shadows are unlikely. If it's not that, it still has to be something to do with the military, right? Something top secret they wouldn't want to disclose, even to assuage hundreds of eyewitness reports. But unexpectedly, the official explanation for the Phoenix Lights is somewhat prosaic and homegrown, with not even a spy balloon in sight. It turns out that what people were seeing was not, in fact, one enormous alien spacecraft the size of more than 10 Boeing jumbo jets put wingtip to wingtip. It was, of course, a military training operation called Operation Grillo. In Operation Snowbird, 5 A-10 jets, Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt I's, nicknamed Warthogs, were flying in formation towards Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson. Later, the line of bright orbs witnessed over Phoenix at around 10 p.m. were actually military LUU-2 illumination flares, dropped from planes at a height of 1/500 serial number of illumination. These flares were attached to small parachutes, making it look like they hung in the air for some time before disappearing as they fell behind the mountain or went out. The operation was run by the Maryland Air National Guard out of Tucson Air Force Base, accounting for why nothing appeared on the books at Luke Air Force Base that night. As they were not flying through restricted airspace, they weren't flagged as anything unusual. An amateur astronomer looking through a telescope on the night of March 13th spotted a formation of 15 planes over Scottsdale, Arizona, each light being a pair of lights on the tips of each plane. So there you go, the Phoenix Lights explained. Boom, done. And that's a wrap. Wait. Why are we only halfway through this script? Very curious. But hold your horses, viewers and listeners. For those shouting from the rooftops that this is just a cover-up, I call this the official explanation, and to be honest, I'm not convinced. Don't worry, we're not at the end of the story yet, and we're not the sort to let a hazy government statement put us off digging a little deeper. Here's the rub. On the face of it, planes and flares are a boring but sort of expected answer for this sort of thing. Yet, there are many odd points to the story that make it sound less convincing as it goes on. For one, the Phoenix Lights event happened in mid-March 1997, yet it wasn't until July, 4 months later, that Captain Eileen Beans of the Arizona Air National Guard addressed the public on what really happened that night. The National Guard finally had enough of all the UFO nonsense and started investigating. No planes were doing anything out of the ordinary at Luke Air Base that night, but it turns out that a squadron from the Maryland Air National Guard, who were temporarily based out of Tucson, had been flying around as part of their Operation Snowbird training exercise. So why did it take 4 months for someone to bring this to the public's attention? It seems awfully suspicious to suddenly come out with an explanation so long after the event that people just aren't forgetting about. While it might explain things on the surface, it doesn't add up at all. I'm totally into this just being a cover-up for whatever the military is really up to. It's not aliens, it's just like, the military are like, yeah, we're doing this flight formation thing, and will you guys leave us alone now? And we're not going to tell you about our special space helium balloon thing that we were testing out. It's just, they're covering up for special space helium balloon thing that we were testing out. It's just, they're covering up for military stuff like spy planes and whatever. Why don't they tell us? I wish we knew what they were testing. It's been ages, 1997. Come on. It's been like 30 years. Tell us. At the time, even Captain Eileen Beans confirmed that where the Maryland Air Guard said they were flying didn't exactly match the course of the lights that people had been seeing. They started in Nevada, for Pete's sake. Surely someone, somewhere, would have already known a training operation over multiple states' airspace was going on. I don't know whether these particular lights showed up on any radar, as apparently the airport didn't find air food, remove them from the airport. But apparently the flares had to be dropped until it was too late to find out. Apparently, the flares had to be dropped as planes weren't allowed to land with them still on board. So, one or all pilots were getting rid of them before returning to base. Lots of lights weren't seen, however, only about 6, and they were all in a uniform row. Would all of the planes have just offloaded their spare flares at the exact same time over a densely populated area, or could one plane just drop them and they all spread out pretty equally? Even though I'm making this sound unlikely, I'm actually less convinced that the row of orbs seen over Phoenix were extraterrestrial now, as it seems like military flares might be a good shout. Yes, and I think their planes could very easily drop things in sequence. The military is really good at doing things orderly. Like the planes, they fly in formation. You're like, how's that work? That's amazing. When someone asks me to drive along the highway at the exact same speed as someone else, I find it very challenging. But, these planes often in the same time doesn't seem like a particularly big challenge, does it? On first blush, it seems like a stupid suggestion, as people know what flares look like. They emit smoke and move around quite noticeably, and are unlikely to hold a straight line for many minutes at a time. So your average flare, they are highly technically conservative. But there are special flares, and didn't they say these had parachutes and all that stuff? The illumination flares the Maryland Air Guard reportedly dropped were parachute flares, designed to illuminate a large area for several minutes for search and rescue teams. In 1997, people couldn't whip out a cell phone and immediately start recording good quality videos. The videos we do have are a bit jerky and grainy and are from varying distances, so it's quite hard to work out how far away, how high up, and therefore how large the lights are. It's also probable that from a distance any trailing smoke wouldn't be visible, especially at night against the contrast of the bright flare. I also saw a video shot by Dennis P. Framer, who is apparently the chief investigator of the Arizona branch of MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network. In January 2013, using a fancy Canon XH-ON-S high-definition camera, he took a video of some illumination flares being dropped over the Barry Goldwater training range in Arizona, And guess what? They look not only exactly like the line of lights over Phoenix, but also like the orbs photographed by Garismos' camera. He took a video of some illumination flares being dropped over the Barry Goldwater training range in Arizona. And guess what? They looked not only exactly the like of the line of lights over Phoenix, but also like the orbs photographed by dynamic mathematicians in perfect image. Framer also says that he's over 50 miles away from the training range. When he turned to night vision mode, it was clear that the orbs were in fact flickery flares, and you could even make out the smoke trail very easily. The flares were on parachutes, which couldn't be made out on the video, and held their formations well, without appearing to move around much or drift apart. When the new ones drop, there's a slight delay, so it looks like they just blink out of nowhere. This doesn't really explain the fact that the Phoenix lights blinked out in a different order than they appeared, but maybe some of the flares just burned a bit quicker. Again, this always comes down to a balance. What's the more likely answer? It's either aliens or it's flares burning at slightly different rates. Come on, use your big brains, people. It's not hard. This type of flare can be dropped from a huge range of heights, and nobody on the ground would truly have any idea how high up, and therefore how big they are. If the flares were dropped miles away from the onlookers, and at a high altitude, it might not be evident to the naked eye that they are in fact moving before they burn out or disappear behind a mountain. Dennis Framer also noted that they get calls to report UFOs every time the military drops flares at higher altitudes, as they can be seen from much farther away and therefore by more people. Dr. Lynn Kaite is staunch in her belief that the rows of orbs were not flares. Of course she is, because she's locked into her opinion. I believe that she believes it, but when presented with evidence of another belief, she dismisses it. On her website, the flare theory is listed in the myth section. She also asked, pretty fairly, if flares are routinely dropped over the Barry Goldwater range, and they have done so since 1941, wouldn't it be logical to assume that most people in Phoenix are used to seeing them? What would prompt thousands of people to suddenly call into local newspapers, police stations, news stations, radio stations, and Luke Air Force Base, all on the same night and all around the same time? It is plainly obvious that many people saw something very strange, not something as mundane or routine as a flare drop, and felt compelled to report it and find out what it was. I would feel the same had I not seen Dennis Framer's footage. I guess the Maryland Air Guard just dropped the flares from much higher than usual, maybe in an area that they weren't really supposed to, so more people ended up being able to see them. Very reasonable explanation there. I even have local evidence that military flares can in fact burn for over 20 minutes. I live not far from Camp Pendleton in Orange County, and someone on our neighborhood Facebook group posted a picture of 3 vertical orbs in the night sky, saying that they had hovered there for nearly 20 minutes. This is starting to sound familiar. Sometimes there are 2 running towards the ear. Someone else replied, probably night illumination from Pendleton. They are usually fired out of an 81mm mortar. They burn long and bright, floating down on a parachute. It's fun if you're not the enemy. We're about 30 miles away for reference. Those things are hella bright if that's 30 miles away. It's so crazy that they had these giant flares. To me, a flare is something you shoot up in the air on a life raft or something, but that they had these things they launch out of an 81mm mortar. that burn for a long time is super interesting and explains why those lights could have hovered for nearly 20 minutes. Parachute flares that can illuminate a whole area are crazy cool. But throwing a spanner in the works, Jim Diletoso, who founded Village Labs, an image processing company, ran all kinds of software comparisons with video footage of the Phoenix Lights orbs compared with flares. He had about 6,000 frames of the lights to work with and measured the brightness over the course of the film. It stays the same, whereas a flare's brightness oscillates up and down. He also processed photographs of the Phoenix Lights, compared with flare lights to study the color content, and the results were very different. Okay, well, I'm just gonna be like, different types of flares, right? Hoping of making our future friends. Yeah, from what I'm gathering, like the details that Framer was able to shoot in 2013 are completely different from the Phoenix Lights with different type of flares, right? Having seen more flare evidence, I contend that maybe he was comparing 1997 camera and film footage, not the high-def stuff that Framer was able to shoot in 2013. The images Diletoso was processing would not have been able to accurately capture or represent much about a ball of light that far away. Okay, so I think I've managed to convince myself that the rows of lights over Phoenix were, in fact, military flares. But what about the wedge-shaped or V-shaped craft that was spotted earlier in the evening? Was that just a bunch of planes flying in formation? For me, the biggest piece of evidence against the 810 jet explanation is all the eyewitness accounts. Yeah, I know people see what they want to see, exaggerate, and even just flat out lie for various reasons, but the similar accounts given by numerous people who weren't connected in any way are very compelling. I never even heard of this event prior to many people making requests for this episode, and when I watched the 2005 documentary The Phoenix Lights as part of my research, I was shook. Even discounting the line of orbs later seen over Phoenix's flares, a group of planes flying in formation just does not, in any way, shape or form, explain what these people experienced when the V of light flew over them earlier that evening. We take their word for it at least. Here's why the explanation of 5 planes going over is totally ludicrous. 1. All the witnesses in the documentary were grown adults who would know what planes were. They lived near an international airport and an Air Force base, so were used to seeing planes at all times of day and night. They did not report seeing 5 planes. They reported seeing 5 extremely large lights, these 2. The lights were agreed to be orange-amber, large circles or ovals, as though they were attached to the underside of something. They were not spotlights or searchlights shining down on people. They were extremely large circles of self-contained light passing overhead. 3. Some of the witnesses who were outside and underneath the lights as they passed over said that they were no more than 100 to 150 feet above them, and they were almost completely silent. There's no way in hell that any type of plane could fly that close to you without you being able to hear it, unless it's just deafened you because of how close it is. Also, there would be some sort of downdraft or turbulence which nobody reported for. The lights went by extremely slowly, way slower than a plane would be able to fly and maintain itself in the air. These lights were going across horizontally and level, not going up and down and moving about. Some witnesses then said the craft suddenly sped off, not something a blimp or an airship would be able to do. 5. Some people thought the lights were fixed in place to a structure and extrapolated that it would have been about a mile across at its widest point. There isn't enough evidence to confirm the lights were part of a bigger craft, but the formation the witness saw held its shape the whole time. But it's doubtful that we're capable of building an aircraft that large at the moment. According to the amateur astronomer, he saw 5 planes in the sky, and the lights people reported were just wing lights on the planes. And I'm sorry, but these planes could have been there totally independently of this other light event. If the planes were high up enough that 2 wing lights looked like one, they would be so high as to not be particularly noticeable to anybody on the ground. These people are saying that the lights were large and flew silently and smoothly over their heads, not that they saw 5 tiny lights twinkling in the sky. 7. If the eyewitnesses were off about the size of the thing and it really was some sort of secret military equipment or test, why would they fly it so low and so close to homes and also down the 10 freeway over the middle of a crowded city? People were actively paying attention to the night sky as the Hale-Bopp comet was still visible. If it was a secret test, they couldn't have chosen a worse route or time. There's also a lot of far less populated terrain just a few miles away where the military trains all the time. Hey, a few people might be discredited as having fallen victim to an optical illusion or something, but so many people in different areas reported seeing the same sort of craft. You can't help but think that there must be something to it. I totally agree. I don't think these people imagined it. I think they definitely saw something weird. As well as that, here are some other things that don't add up and really push my thoughts toward a cover-up. It's not like they're trying to cover up something nefarious. It's just a military test, isn't it? People who were active in the Air Force at the time recounted seeing the craft's lights and not being able to identify what they were. Planes should have other lights on, even on training exercises, and probably especially if they are doing training exercises in the dark over a major city. 911 operator at the time of the incident reported that the lines were full of people calling in to report the lights, but nobody seemed scared, only interested. She said this was downplayed by the local press, who only reported that a few calls had come in. She also said that pilots, air traffic controllers, airport workers, police officers, and other people who may have knowledge of planes were all calling in to report their sightings. Former councilwoman Frances Barwood said that after receiving thousands of calls from eyewitnesses in support of an investigation into the lights, she and her team tried to talk to every person who had left a message over the council's summer break. She estimates that over the course of a couple of months, she personally spoke to 700 people, with every single one saying the same thing. Apart from one person in the documentary, she says, and the one was the one they decided to publicize, which was the kid who said it was airplanes. Other lights in other countries notwithstanding, similar amber orbs have been seen in and near the area of the Phoenix lights on multiple occasions before and since. As another interesting tidbit, the first pilot to radio in about the lights was approaching the airport in a small plane with his son. They both saw 6 lights uniformly spaced in a V shape. The pilot radioed the tower to make sure that they were clear for landing and that the lights weren't other planes or something they should be worried about. The tower confirmed that the lights were not planes, as nothing was on the radar. The pilot landed fine, and took off again later that night. He forgot all about it until 2 years later when his partner was watching something about the Phoenix lights on TV, and the original call-in from the pilot was mentioned. All of a sudden, the pilot remembered that it had been him who had called in, and his son had completely forgotten about the incident. He hadn't even put it in his logbook. Remember Fife Symington, the Arizona state governor, who brushed away concerns with a press conference featuring someone dressed up in an alien costume? Years later, he totally backtracked and said he himself had witnessed the craft and couldn't explain it. To avoid causing a panic and to cope with all the media interest, he had just laughed it off. But now, he admits that he saw something unexplainable. In a show called UFO Hunters, he said, "I describe what I saw as being otherworldly." According to Qatar News, Symington said, "I'm a pilot and I know just about every machine that flies. It was bigger than anything I've ever seen. It remains a great mystery. Other people saw it, responsible people. I don't know why people would ridicule it." Dude, you ridiculed yourself? What are you chatting about? You ridiculed yourself. Also, you know every machine that flies except for all the secret ones, mate. A lot of time has passed now, and if flares and aircraft aren't the answer, we are still no closer to finding out any more about the strange lights over Nevada and Arizona that night in March 1997. In fact, as anniversaries come and go, the same familiar faces keep popping up to keep the story in the public consciousness. That doesn't do much to help the cause, if you ask me. Having Dr. Lynn Kaite pumping out the same catchphrases in interview after interview just lessens their impact. She wrote and directed the 2005 Phoenix Lights documentary, by the way, which was also based on a book she wrote, oddly enough called The Phoenix Lights, A Skeptic's Discovery That We Are Not Alone. She says at one point, talking about how the craft may have come from another dimension, "We may just be looking on the AM dial for an FM frequency." Another possible take is that the extraterrestrial craft was real and the military scrambled to tack their own event onto it to explain the whole night. The account of the V-shaped craft was different enough from the row of lights over Phoenix that the two events are now considered separate things. Because of the time that passed between the event and the military tossing out Operation Snowbird as an explanation, it just served to convince people that what they really saw was from another dimension or another world. I don't understand why people are so quick to jump to this when there's no real evidence for it. It's like, yeah, it could be some secret military thing, or it could be aliens. Why would you jump to aliens? We know, like I've said, I believe aliens are real, but something we know for a fact is real and here on Earth is secret military stuff. Why don't we jump to that explanation rather than the aliens explanation? I don't understand how people's brains work who jump to aliens. In the Phoenix Lights episode of UFO Hunters, I was quite surprised that conspiracy-minded ufologist Phil Barnes decided at the end that what flew over these people's heads was a rigid hull airship. Oh, Phil, you've really let the side down here. What about the size and swift acceleration? Why was it flying so low, Phil? Why? It might be worth saying, though, that while a lot of people have steadfastly clung to the idea that the lights were extraterrestrial in origin, some remain more level-headed. While they can't rule aliens out, they can't exactly rule them in. I like all these level-headed people. They remind me of me. Personally, I think I do agree about the flares part. Sorry, Dr. Lin, as they can last a lot longer than people realize. But the reports from earlier in the evening about the large V or wedge formation of huge lights slowly overhead is much more difficult to explain away. although there's no actual footage of it, which is obviously an issue. Yet why did no one point a video camera at it? And how many people called in? I really want to know, because if it was like 10 people, I'd be like, shut up. If it was like 1,000, I'd be like, okay, that's a lot, but why did no one point a video camera at it? In more recent times, there have been confirmed hoaxes, such as in April 2008, when mysterious lights once again appeared over Phoenix. This turned out to be someone intentionally pranking the public by tying road flares to helium balloons and letting them go at 1-minute intervals from his back garden. A movie called Phoenix Forgotten came out in 2017, which used the old found footage trope to tie the Phoenix Lights event to the fictional disappearance of some teenagers. Ridley Scott is listed as one of the producers, but it only has a 5.3 on IMDb, so I won't bother with that one. 5.3 on IMDb is bad, because IMDb ratings usually range between 6 and 8 unless something is shockingly poor or shockingly good. In conclusion then, while I might have made myself part of a cover-up I don't really understand, I'm more or less convinced that any orbs, rows of lights in the sky, etc., can be explained satisfactorily as illumination flares, and that's a different story. And that's where we end today's episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.